A caged monkey's bold action strikes a chord in the activist heart of a PETA VP and provides an enduring call to action. That's next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for the animals. On today's episode, one story from PETA Reveals, the new video series on PETA.org.
I am the daughter of immigrants and an immigrant myself. Growing up, I felt insecure about being different. Our family wore different clothes, we ate different food, we spoke a different language. I felt out of place. Even as an adult, I would sometimes let my authentic voice get drowned out by my insecurities. Thankfully, when I started working at PETA, things began falling into place because I was doing a job that was true to my authentic self, that resonated with my deepest held convictions.
Dr. Alka Chanda is a PETA VP in the Laboratory Investigations Department. Her life story reveals how being an immigrant contributes to her activist empathy. On the podcast, she talks more about her first assignment at PETA, looking at undercover footage at Covance Labs and how it conducted experiments on monkeys, and one monkey in particular.
What I always think about when I think about that monkey at Covance is how she had nothing. You know, she didn't speak the language. She was in a foreign environment. I mean, she was really an outsider, and she was like the absolute oppressed in that godforsaken laboratory. And in spite of that, she took what she had and she used it to try to help somebody else. And I think there's something so instructive in that.
The Monkey's Lesson, next on the PETA Podcast. But first, thanks again for joining us here at the PETA Podcast. Please share a link with your friends. That's important. You know, pass it around one set of ears to another. Let all your contacts know the animals have a voice on the PETA Podcast. And if you're new to podcasting, binge away. Go to sleep with us even. Your nightly bedtime story. Some people think this is sleep-inducing. You can start with PETA President and co-founder Ingrid Newkirk in episode 1, or start with this one and go backwards. See what PETA did for the companion animals adrift during and after Hurricane Florence. And find out more about a muscular dystrophy patient from the UK who flew 10 hours from England to Texas A&M to protest that university's useless animal experiments. His interview in episode 32. Then check out episode 9. To find out more about how Texas A&M tortures dogs and gives them muscular dystrophy, knowing full well that that version of the disease has little relevance toward finding a cure that works for humans. Remember, if you're on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps the algorithm know that PETA has a podcast on the issues important to you. Now, if you really want to help the animals, you can always just hit the donate button at PETA.org. And if you're high-tech and have Amazon's Alexa, it's as easy as saying, Alexa, donate to PETA. And now to our episode. What does it take to move one to action? Are you born that way? Do you move into a new situation, like an immigrant to a new country, and does something happen? Do you learn something anew? Or do you witness a tiny animal, like a monkey, be unafraid and do something heroic? On PETA Reveals, a new video series on PETA.org, Dr. Alka Chanda talks about how a monkey taught her a lesson that continues to spur her activism. Here she is now on the PETA Podcast. Tell us a little more about feeling like an outsider where you grew up and how that might have informed your sense of the need or the importance of being an activist.
Well, my parents and I moved to Canada from India in 1966. I was 3 years old then. And so this was a time when there weren't very many people from the Indian subcontinent in North America. There were probably about a dozen families in the town where I grew up, Windsor, Ontario. And so we very much felt like outsiders. We didn't go to church like everybody else in my school. We wore different clothes. We spoke a different language at home. I knew that my parents' sense of ethics was very different from those of my friends and their families. And so, there was always this business of straddling, between two worlds, the world that we had at home where there were certain, ethical principles and a language that we spoke and things that were considered right and things that were considered wrong. And also this was, the mid to late 1960s where things were going, in all kinds of different directions in Canada and the US. And so that was something that I'm sure even people who grew up in North America were dealing with. And certainly my parents coming from a conservative background in India and being, socially conservative, certainly it was tough for them. And that definitely had a bearing on me.
Yeah. So this was in the late 60s, early 70s again. What year?
Yeah, that's correct. I was 3 years old in 66. And growing up, you're talking about, the 70s, late 60s.
So, and basically civil rights come into play in 64, 65. And then once the law gets passed, there's this transition period to really make the law work. And how did your parents relate? I mean, you talk about the difficulty of straddling and being of both worlds, and how did they relate to this movement that was really one of black and white? And where did your family fall?
We definitely had sympathies with people of color. Windsor is across the border from Detroit, Michigan. And I'm sure many of your listeners and you will recall that, Detroit went up in flames with the riots in the late 60s, and particularly after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And, I remember a time when we used to walk across the Ambassador Bridge to go to Detroit, just because it was this a culturally exciting place. It wasn't, monolithic the way Windsor, Ontario was at the time. So we would go there to go to the Middle Eastern market and, go there for other things. And it was always really exciting because people, were so different. And there was this rich diversity of people in Detroit, which contrasted with what we were seeing in Windsor. And certainly my parents, even though they were socially conservative, they were politically liberal, and there was definitely a lot of sense of resonance with what was coming up with the civil rights movement. And my father is darker skinned, and a darker skinned Indian, and so when I would look at him, I would see, there really is like a spectrum, and so we look more like the people who were agitating for civil rights than we look like the people who were oppressing those populations. There was always like a sense of identity with that.
Yeah, and solidarity, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And how about, did you ever feel the wrath of those who were on the other side, who might have been opposed to civil rights? And did that change how you and your family looked at all things American at that point?
Yeah, unquestionably. I mean, there's a long history of, various incidents that I can think of when, from the time that I was young, growing up through my adolescence into my years at university, and beyond, incidents where, obviously, There were all kinds of racial slurs that were used. There was a time, so when my parents, they used to rent houses from the university. They both worked for the university in Windsor. And they used to rent houses. And then at a certain point, when they decided they were going to stay in Canada, they bought a house in the suburbs. And there was a petition that went around saying that we shouldn't be allowed to live there and that we shouldn't be allowed to buy a house because we weren't white like everybody else. So there were things of that nature. Then there were things, these sort of more subtle things that were said. And it's kind of a funny thing to think of now because it resonates with my work at PETA. So when I was younger and going through elementary school, people would talk about how stupid Indians were because they revered cows. There were cows walking around on the streets in India, and meanwhile, human beings were starving. So there was, and I didn't know, I didn't know what it meant to maybe be foregoing cow flesh, for the sake of survival. And I didn't know the environmental arguments, and it was well before Francis Moore Lappé had written Diet for a Small Planet. Right. So I didn't know that these kids who were saying these things to me and telling me how stupid my people were, how wrong they were in saying that, we were stupid not to eat meat. And I was raised vegetarian, so that also was a manner in which we were different, which I really disliked. I disliked being different, because it did make me seem odd and like an outsider.
But it did give you a sense of, I don't know, did you want to fight back, or did it give you a unique sense of social justice or the need for social justice or justice for all? Is the case broadened out to include animals?
Yeah, I think, there are a few things. One is that being seen as an outsider and having different values than what the majority holds allowed me to strengthen that particular way of critiquing ethics and ethical mores and norms, knowing that just because something is written in a book somewhere doesn't make it so, doesn't make it the law of the land, or doesn't make it something that can't be challenged. So there was a nice flexibility in my, that came in, an ability to assess what was being said, or, ethical truths that were being pronounced. There was an ability to look beyond cultural norms and things that have historically been accepted, to say, well, maybe there's something beyond what one culture, another culture, this other culture says about a certain thing. Maybe there's some more exploring that we could do here. When you think about issues like ethics being different from culture to culture, and whether there isn't some kind of universal truth through all of it.
Yeah, but being an outsider helped give you a kind of courage to challenge and a courage to see beyond what you were seeing in front of you, knowing that there may be something else. It gave you maybe the ability to stand up and be the kind of activist you are?
I think so. And I think this is true for anybody who finds any challenge in their life, whether it's because of their sexual orientation or their race, or, even frankly, their gender.
Right.
When you have people that are outside the dominant, powerful group, or even within the dominant, powerful group, but are finding challenges either because they're poor or because, something has happened to them, something where they can see oppression at its face and recognize that it's wrong, to know what it feels like to be at the receiving end of somebody's hatred or somebody's dismissal, that refusal to see, the refusal to acknowledge somebody else's worth. I think that being different or being in an outside group of people, being somebody who is in a class that's oppressed, all of these things are opportunities for us where we can then find our voice and, see that there are opportunities to make the world a better place, and not only for our own group, but really for everybody.
Well, in your PETA Reveals talk, you explained that when you took a job at PETA, you found your authentic self. So most people are searching for ways to do that in their lives. What was it about working at PETA that made you feel you could be yourself and you could express yourself as the true activist that you
are? For one thing, it was being surrounded by people who felt the way I did about something that is pretty much embedded in, I think, my DNA. It is to me the most fundamental issue, and that's having respect for everybody and recognizing, as Ingrid Newkirk says, that it doesn't matter whether we have skin or fur or we're covered in fins or we have feathers. We all feel pain. We all suffer. And that it's that unity that is the driving force for having justice for everybody, for considering everybody, and recognizing that everybody should be respected. So being surrounded by other people who felt this way, for whom this was, really the driving passion of their lives, was really empowering. Prior to coming to PETA, I'd worked as a professor for 5 years, teaching mathematics. And, I like mathematics fine, and I loved my colleagues. But, I don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I can't wait to teach people calculus. That's really not, as wonderful as calculus might be. But here was this opportunity to have colleagues who cared as much as I did about something that is so fundamental. Emil, when I was going through graduate school, I remember learning about different mathematicians. And, I would see that they were around at a certain time. And I'd always think, oh, this was the time when, India was under the thumb of colonialism, or this was the time that XYZ thing was happening historically. And I would always think how funny it was that somebody was working on mathematics or, whatever it was, engineering or anything, and not involved in the struggle. So I think that, even when I was entrenched in academia and this other work that I used to do in corporate America, even when I was entrenched in those worlds, my heart was really thinking about the people who had made changes, who had, struggled for a better world for everybody.
Yeah, that's really a unique perspective, especially, I don't know too many mathematicians, but there's a history of math. And, when the guys are playing, I'm sure there were some gals, but it was still kind of a guy world back then in the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries. People were playing with numbers and all this stuff was going on, and they were still playing with their numbers. And I guess that had to give you a sense of like, hey guys, there's something else happening in the world. We'll get the right answer, but there's other answers out there, right?
Yeah, it always seemed to me that the real action was not in calculus. And I don't mean to denigrate, people who do that, but it just wasn't for me.
It's still important, numbers, higher math. I'm still in the mid to lower math, quadratic equation or quadratic formula, that kind of thing. That's algebra, right? That's not even high math. That's like solve for X. Well, look, now you solved for X. You found your X, right? It was working with animals. Still very difficult. I know you've reviewed hundreds of hours of abuse inside laboratories, which isn't easy. But it was when you were watching video of monkeys at Covance that one of the monkeys changed your life.
Yeah, the Covance investigation, that was the first investigation that I worked on at PETA or ever. And prior to that, I had been a grassroots activist, and I had watched every single video that came out of PETA. So, I saw the Silver Spring monkey photos, and I saw the video from the laboratory that was called SEMA is now Bioqual, with chimpanzees who were infected with AIDS, and all of that. And I saw many, many videos, the University of Pennsylvania head injury clinic, where baboons were, had their heads smashed into these cement helmets. I had seen all those videos, and I'd seen those videos many, many times because I used to run an animal rights group on my campus, and we would screen these videos. And so I'd seen all of that. But what really came home to me doing the Covance investigation, and what really shook me to my core, is that, I had watched these 5-minute, 10-minute videos and seen these compilations of horrific things happening. And with Covance, what I was seeing was that these monkeys were being force-fed various things, test pharmaceuticals or industrial chemicals, pesticides, etc. And this dosing kept happening day after day after day. And the monkeys were getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Their hair was falling out. They were getting necrotic lesions on their bodies. They were vomiting. They had diarrhea. All of these horrible things. They were losing weight. And every night I would go home from work, and I would have like a comfortable house that I was going to, eating all manner of foods, being with my family. And those monkeys were still in the cages. Through the course of the investigation, I think at some point I got a flu or, cold or something like that. And I felt horrible. And I'm a bit of a whiny person when I get sick. So I remember being at home and having my husband make soup for me and eating fruit and trying to get better and being under covers. And I remember thinking, I have all of this, and the monkeys, they just have their barren metal cages, no blankets, no one taking care of them, no one looking after them. Veterinary care was not given to them deliberately because it would interfere with the scientific objectives of the experiments. And just the difference in the two worlds, me being sick with, stupid little flu, like nothing big, and these monkeys being so sick that they were dying and they had nothing. So that, for me, was a really revelatory aspect of the whole Covance investigation.
Basically, you had a relationship with these monkeys. I mean, they were in cages, you were free, but you had this connection with them.
Yeah. Our eyewitness investigation folks, the people who work in these facilities, take very detailed notes. And what that means is, they will identify the monkeys or the other, whoever the animals are. And so you can follow basically the trajectory of these animals, as they're going through the tests and everything's happening to them. So, you can pull out these stories. And yes, it became very personal in the sense of really knowing who these animals were and understanding, sort of their trajectory through that laboratory and the manner in which they were used as a tool for the experimenters, and treated really as inanimate objects.
And so you developed this relationship, and you say this in your PETA Reveals talk. You talk about one small monkey and what you observed. And it's a very touching thing because the monkey takes a stand and you're observing this. Tell me about that monkey and what the monkey did and how it made you feel when you saw the monkey take this action.
The thing that was really just horrifying, and I do feel that, as much as we've seen a lot of abuse at a lot of different facilities, one of the issues at Covance was that the workers were particularly abusive physically and psychologically. It really was like a unilateral war that they had declared against the monkeys in the facility. And, I don't know why. Like, these are monkeys who are 2 years old. They're 12 pounds. They're tiny, juvenile monkeys. For some reason, the workers decided that they hated them. And they would, smack them and shake them and, pull them by the scruff and violently just handle them. this was happening every single day. And it wasn't just one worker or two workers. I mean, across the board, there were workers who were doing this, and even female workers and male workers. And, just every single day, it's like they couldn't go to a cage and take out a monkey, to use the monkey in the test. They had to grab the monkey and shake the monkey and then, yell at the monkey. And these monkeys are just terrified. And you can see it in the video footage where the monkeys are chattering their teeth, which is how they signal submissiveness, like they're saying, uncle, uncle. But the workers didn't care. So this was happening one day as it was happening every day. But somehow the investigator, the eyewitness, managed to capture in the frame of the video that there was a monkey who was caged, and she was reaching out her hand to try to stop that worker from physically abusing her, the monkey in the cage next to her, so her neighbor. And it was really, really shocking. I mean, I was just amazed to see this, that in spite of the fact that this monkey had absolutely nothing. Okay, so to backtrack a little bit, the monkeys at Covance, they come from factory farms in Southeast Asia. Right. They're shipped thousands of miles, from China, Vietnam, and other places in Southeast Asia. They're shipped, and put in these cages. And even though they're social animals, they're housed by themselves, or they're just locked in these tiny cages where they can take about one or two steps in each direction. That's their lives. There's, nothing to engage them. It's just boredom and fear and pain.
Yeah. And the monkeys comes from its natural site. They're plucked from the wild and sent to, where was this lab?
So the monkeys in Southeast Asia, some of them are taken from their homes in the wild. So from jungles, they're captured up, and then, but then those monkeys seed these factory farms. I mean, and that really is the word to describe them. And there have been some incredible investigations of these factory farms in Southeast Asia, where conditions are absolutely ramshackle, and monkeys are held in, cages that are just bigger than their bodies. It would be like us living in a telephone booth. And then sometimes they're kept in corrals with many, many monkeys, but they're barely fed. People who have gone in to document the conditions in these facilities talk about how the workers, will put down some food, but basically the larger males get the food and everybody else starves. And there are just some horrific photographic and videographic documentations on the conditions there. But that's where the monkeys come from.
They're basically kind of farmed and bred, and then they take all the monkeys and bring them to Covance, which is where now? It was
the Covance facility where our eyewitness worked was in Vienna, Virginia, which is just outside of Washington, D.C.
Right.
Yeah, that facility is now closed, thankfully. But that's where the monkeys were. But, I offer that context because it helps us understand who that monkey was. So she was somebody who probably came from Southeast Asia, who had a wretched childhood. When she was born, she was probably taken away from her mother right away. And then she was put into a wooden crate, shipped, in the cargo hold of an airplane, brought over to the U.S., kept in quarantine, and now singly housed by herself in this cage. And, for all she knows, there are these, massive beings who are 15 times her size, who are manhandling her and the other monkeys. She herself was certainly used in experiments and knows what it's like to be dosed, have the thick gavage plastic tube thrust up her nose, to have compounds pumped in. So that's her condition, somebody who has been abused and used and has been put in this very foreign environment and knows nothing about, what's going to happen to her. But it's like a life of absolute fear and deprivation and terror. That's her life. And in spite of that, when she saw her neighbor being beaten, she did what she could do, which was she reached out her arm to try to stop that violence. And I was floored by that. It was just incredible.
What was your reaction at that when you saw it?
I've often said to people, well, I can't cry. Nobody's paying me to cry. And so, by and large, I'm able to keep it down because I have to be really focused on gathering the evidence, writing down the time codes for the videos and, seeing where different things are happening, seeing where there are violations of animal welfare laws, a real focus on these sorts of things so that we can build a case. So, by and large, I don't cry when I am working. But, in that instance, I definitely broke down.
Did it also inspire you, though, in a way?
Yeah, not in the moment. I had to really reflect on it because it would happen. And I know that I framed this story as being, I'm an immigrant and how I've been different and I've been an outsider, and all of that's true. But, there are other things going on too. And I think all of us, many of us have experienced this sort of thing. We may think that we're not as articulate as we might want to be. We may not be as presentable as we might want to be. We might not have as many resources as we might want to have to wage the sorts of, fights and campaigns that we want to wage. That's just a reality for all of us. And, this is something that has come up time and again, where I will think, oh, I wish I had become a medical doctor, then I would be more equipped to do this work. Or I wish, I was smarter. I wish I had a better memory, or I wish my vocabulary was better. There might be any number of things where I think only if I had this, I would be a better activist. And that comes up a lot. And I think it comes up for not just me, but for many people. We think these things. We think about what we don't have. And what I always think about when I think about that monkey at Covance is how she had nothing. She didn't speak the language. She was in a foreign environment. I mean, she was really an outsider, and she was like the absolute oppressed in that godforsaken laboratory. And in spite of that, she took what she had and she used it to try to help somebody else. And I think there's something so instructive in that. There's something where, we get hung up on our inadequacies. We get hung up on, how we might not have everything in the world. And sure, it's true. Covance is like a company that posts revenues well in excess of $1 billion every year. They're massive, and that's just one of our adversaries, and you multiply that by 100 million, and then you're talking about, who and what we're up against. So you can start feeling that, we don't have a snowball's chance in hell of making a difference. But then when we remember what we do have, we have our voices and we can speak out. I think that's where that monkey's action, goes well beyond the confines of her cage and well beyond the walls of that horrible laboratory. And that action speaks to all of us and says, if she, that little 12-pound, 2-year-old female monkey, stolen from her home, raised in wretched conditions, shipped thousands of miles, put in a foreign environment, treated violently and abusively. If she can act, then who are we to say that we cannot act?
How about that sense of courage, that seeing that monkey's gesture, that monkey's bold action relative to everything? It was bold, certainly. What sort of courage does that give you as an observer? And how does it help you as an activist?
The courage is humbling. That monkey's courage is so humbling to know that even having nothing, she took action. Even being afraid, as she surely had to have been, even knowing that that man could hurt her. In spite of all of that, she still took some action to try to help the other monkey. So it's humbling to see that someone in her position did that. And the way that is helpful and has been helpful to me in my activism has been to remember that we shouldn't feel paralyzed by what we don't have, that we should take what we have and run with it, and do whatever we can to try to stop the violence. I could be on my deathbed and I'll never have the knowledge that I feel that I need to have right now to make a difference. I can be on my deathbed and feel like I've never, gotten built up enough of a vocabulary to be as articulate as I need to be to try to, shake the masses into caring. But, you kind of have to cut your losses and just go for it. And so I feel that's sort of the lesson that I've taken, that relative to that monkey, I am the wealthiest person. I am a person with unparalleled power. I'm not locked in a cage. I do speak the language of the tormentors. I do, have these tools that I can use to try to make a difference. I do work for the world's largest animal rights organization. All of these things are things that should imbue me with great power, and they do. And so I should be remembering that rather than being paralyzed by that which I don't have. And so that's the lesson that the monkey conveyed to me, and her lesson stays with me, every single day.
Well, I think it will. I think PETA Reveals is a great idea. I think your segment was a great one. And really, Alka, thank you for sharing your story here on the PETA Podcast. And I hope that people will go to PETA.org and check out Alka's segment on PETA Reveals.
Thanks so much, Emil.
Dr. Alka Chandna, a VP in PETA's Laboratory Investigations Department. You've listened to her talk. Now you can watch her on PETA Reveals, a new web series at PETA.org. And that's our show for today. You can contact us at PETA.org. Find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or go to AMOK.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. And don't forget, you can help the animals and PETA, especially if you have Amazon's Alexa. Just say, Alexa, donate to PETA. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Emil Guillermo.